What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what he thinks is a friendly conversation only to find himself trapped in a verbal ambush? What you're about to witness is one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. And it all began with a single question nobody saw coming. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on because, trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to have a strong opinion. Kevin Bacon took his seat on the couch wearing that familiar, easygoing smile. The kind of calm, confident presence that's made him a household name for more than 4 decades. The audience applauded warmly. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. The hosts laughed. Bacon was charming. The energy in the studio was light. They talked about his latest project, shared a few amusing behind-the-scenes stories. It was exactly what you'd expect from a routine promotional interview. Then Joy Behar leaned forward. There was a subtle shift in her expression, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "So, Kevin," she began, her tone suddenly more pointed. "I want to ask you about something you said in an interview a few months ago. You mentioned that actors should stay out of politics unless they really know what they're talking about. Did I get that right?" Bacon's smile stayed in place, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Well," he said carefully, "that's not exactly what I said. What I was trying to express is that we all, not just actors, but everyone, should be thoughtful about how we use our platforms. I wasn't saying actors shouldn't speak up. I was saying we should be informed when we do." Joy nodded slowly, but her expression made it clear she wasn't satisfied. "But don't you think that's a little rich?" she pressed, "coming from someone who's benefited from Hollywood for as long as you have. You've had privilege. You've had a massive platform. And now you're essentially telling other people to be quiet." The temperature in the room shifted instantly. You could see it in the way the other hosts glanced at one another, in the way the audience went from warm to uneasy. Bacon straightened in his seat. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but firm. "I'm not telling anyone to be quiet, Joy. That's not what I said then, and it's not what I'm saying now. I'm talking about responsibility. When millions of people are listening to you, I think you have an obligation to understand the complexities of what you're discussing. That applies to me as much as anyone." Joy didn't back down. "But Kevin, don't you realize that sounds like gatekeeping activism? You're basically saying that unless someone meets your standard of being informed enough, they shouldn't speak up about things that matter to them. Don't you see how problematic that is?" Bacon leaned forward now. The charm was gone, replaced by intensity. "No, it's Joy. What's problematic is putting words in my mouth and then arguing against something I never said. I didn't say people shouldn't speak up. I said we should be thoughtful and informed. There's a difference, and I think you know that." The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and applause, clearly divided. One of the other hosts tried to step in, attempting to diffuse the tension, but Joy raised her hand. "I'm not putting words in your mouth," she said. "I'm interpreting what you said." That's what a lot of people did when they heard that interview. And many of us heard it as someone who's comfortable and successful, telling others to check themselves before they speak. Maybe that's not what you meant, but it is how it came across. Bacon's jaw tightened. "Then maybe the issue isn't what I said," he replied, "but how determined some people are to interpret it in the worst possible way. I've spent my entire career trying to use my platform responsibly. I've supported causes I believe in. I've educated myself. I've listened to people who know more than I do. All I suggested was that others might want to do the same. If that's controversial, then I guess I'm guilty." Joy leaned back, crossing her arms. "You know what I think, Kevin?" she said. "I think what's really going on is that you're uncomfortable with younger actors who are more diverse, who represent marginalized communities using their voices in ways that make people in your generation uneasy. And instead of examining that discomfort, You're trying to police how they express themselves. The silence that followed was deafening. Bacon stared at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but razor sharp. That is completely out of line. You don't know me well enough to make assumptions about what makes me uncomfortable or why. And it's insulting to suggest that my concern for informed discourse has anything to do with discomfort around diversity. I've worked with, supported, and learned from people of every background throughout my career. What you just said isn't just wrong, it's offensive. Joy didn't flinch. I'm not trying to offend you, Kevin. I'm trying to show you how your words might land with people who don't have the same privilege or platform you do. When someone in your position speaks, it sends a message. And it may not be the one you intended, but it is the one people are hearing. That's when Kevin Bacon stood up. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just definitively. The movement caught everyone off guard. You know what, Joy? He said, I came here expecting a conversation. A real one where people listen and try to understand each other. But this isn't a conversation. You decided what I think and what I meant before I ever sat down on this couch. You're not interested in my actual views. You're interested in scoring points and turning me into something I'm not. One of the other hosts tried again to intervene. Kevin, please let's just take a breath, but Joy cut her off. No, let him finish. Bacon looked directly at her. What I want to say is this. This is the problem. We can't have real discussions anymore, because everyone is obsessed with winning, being right, tearing down anyone who doesn't perfectly align with their worldview. I came on this show in good faith. You ambushed me with a bad faith interpretation of something I said months ago. And when I tried to clarify, you doubled down and accused me of being uncomfortable with diversity. He paused. That's not discourse. Joy, that's a hit job. The audience was completely silent. The tension in the studio was unmistakable, thick, electric, impossible to ignore. Joy's expression hardened. A hit job. She shot back. Really, Kevin? Asking you to explain your own words and pointing out how they might be harmful is a hit job now. Maybe the real issue is that you're not used to being challenged. You're used to people nodding along, treating you like the wise elder statesman of Hollywood. And the moment someone pushes back, you bristle. Bacon's hands clenched at his sides. I can handle being challenged just fine, he said. What I can't handle is being deliberately misrepresented, donned, then insulted when I try to correct the record. You're not trying to understand my perspective. You're trying to tear it down so you can feel morally superior. He paused, then added, quieter but sharper. And the saddest part is, we probably agree on more than we disagree on. But we'll never know that, because you'd rather have a fight than a conversation. Joy stood up, moving to face him across the coffee table. You want to know what I find sad? She said. I think it's sad that someone with your intelligence and experience can't see past their own ego long enough to understand why people are criticizing what you said. You talk about responsibility, about being in for med, but you're not taking responsibility for the impact of your own words. You're deflecting, and you're playing the victim. Bacon's voice rose for the first time. I am not playing the victim, Joy. I'm defending myself against unfair accusations. There's a difference. And if you're so convinced you're right and wrong that you can't even consider the possibility that you're misunderstanding me, then this conversation is pointless. Maybe it is pointless. Joy fired back, matching his intensity. Maybe we can't have a real conversation because one of us came in with an agenda. Yeah, Bacon replied, frustration dripping from every word. One of us definitely did. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough, as producers signaled the cut. The two of them stood locked in a stare that could have melted steel. The other hosts looked visibly shaken. The audience buzzed with shocked whispers, somewhere across the country. Social media was already erupting. But neither Kevin Bacon nor Joy Behar seemed to care. They were too busy holding their ground when the show returned from commercial. The tension was even sharper. Bacon had retaken his seat, but the relaxed, affable movie star was gone. In his place sat someone coiled and ready. Joy wore a familiar expression one longtime viewers recognized instantly. She wasn't finished. "Welcome back," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "Kevin, before the break, you accused me of having an agenda. I think our viewers deserve to hear what you meant by that." Bacon didn't hesitate. "What I meant is that the moment you brought up that interview, it was clear you weren't asking a genuine question. You were setting up an argument. You'd already decided what my words meant, what my motivations were, and what kind of person I am. That's not journalism, and it's not conversation. It's ambush television." Joy's eyes flashed. "Ambush television," she repeated. "Kevin, you're a guest on a talk show. You know how this works. We ask questions, sometimes tough ones, and guests answer them. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing press tours." "I can handle tough questions," Bacon said evenly. "And when I called that out as offensive and unfair," Kevin said, his voice steady but edged, "you doubled down. How is that not deflection on your part?" "Because I'm not the one who made the original statement," Joy shot back. "You did? You went on record saying actors should be careful about speaking out on political issues. And when I point out the implications of that, especially coming from someone in your position, you get defensive and accuse me of attacking you personally." Bacon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do you want to know what the actual implications of what I said were?" he asked. "The real ones, not the version you've constructed. I was talking about responsibility. About the fact that when you have a platform, people listen to you whether you're qualified on a subject or not. And I believe truly that we owe those people the effort of doing our homework, understanding complexity, and not just firing off opinions without considering consequences." "And who gets to decide that?" Joy pressed. "Who decides when someone is informed enough? You, other established actors, the media. Because what it sounds like is that people should think twice before challenging the status quo, which is a very convenient position for someone who benefits from that status quo." Face flushed. "That is not what I'm saying, and you know it. Stop twisting my words to fit your narrative. I'm talking about basic intellectual honesty, about not spreading misinformation, about knowing when you're out of your depth and listening to experts instead of assuming fame equals expertise. And marginalized communities have been told exactly that for generations." Joy fired back. "To wait, to learn more, to stay quiet. And when they finally gain platforms, when their voices are finally heard here, comes someone like you suggesting they should slow down. Can you really not hear how that sounds?" Bacon stood abruptly, real anger in the movement. "I never mentioned marginalized communities. I never singled out any group. I was speaking generally about everyone, including myself. You're the one who injected identity politics into this. You're the one who decided that a call for informed discourse was an attack on diversity. That's your interpretation, not my intent." Joy rose to meet him. "Intent doesn't erase impact. Kevin, your words have consequences whether you meant them that way or not. And your accusations have consequences too." Bacon shot back. "You just implied to national television that I'm uncomfortable with diversity and progress. You essentially branded me a bigot based on a misreading of a statement about intellectual responsibility. Do you understand how serious that is? What that does to someone's reputation?" Joy's voice rose to match his. "We're talking about the harm caused by telling people to stay in their lane. You're worried about your reputation. That's exactly the privilege I'm pointing out. It is not privilege to defend yourself against false accusations. Bacon replied, his voice trembling slightly now. It's not privilege to expect fairness. And it's not privilege to ask that people actually listen to what you're saying instead of hearing what they want to hear. You decided who I am before giving me a fair hearing. The audience was transfixed, some nodding, others shaking their heads. The other hosts looked desperate for an exit. But neither Joy nor Kevin was backing down. You're being held accountable for your own words, Joy said firmly. Words you said publicly. Words on record. No one is inventing anything. And if this feels uncomfortable, maybe it's because you're experiencing briefly what people without your advantages face every day when they speak up. Bacon pointed at her, his hand shaking. Do not presume to tell me what I have or haven't experienced. Do not reduce me to a demographic and weaponize it against me. I've worked my entire life. I've faced rejection, criticism, and failure like anyone else. Success doesn't invalidate my perspective or make me a fair target for moral grandstanding. A heavy silence settled over the studio. Joy stared at him. Unreadable. Then Bacon spoke again. Quieter now, but sharper than before. You know what the saddest part of all this is? He said, we probably agree on most things. We probably want the same outcomes. We probably care about the same people. But we'll never find that common ground because you'd rather win an argument than have a real conversation. And that's what's actually tearing us apart. Something flickered across Joy's face recognition. Maybe defensiveness. That's easy to say when you're under scrutiny, she replied. It's easy to call for civility when you're the one being criticized. Is that what you think this is about? Bacon asked, genuine confusion breaking through. Civility. I don't care about being nice. I care about being fair. I care about being understood. And I care about not being publicly labeled as something I'm not because it fits a narrative. That's not civility, that's honesty. One of the other hosts finally stepped in. I think what we're seeing is two different frameworks, they said cautiously. Kevin, you're talking about individual responsibility and accuracy. Joy, you're talking about systemic power and access. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive. Joy shook her head. They are when one framework is used to silence the other. When someone with Kevin's influence speaks the way he did, it has a chilling effect on people who already feel unheard. That's the reality. Bacon sat back down, intensity still burning. A chilling effect. I'm arguing for education before amplification. For accuracy before outrage. How is that silencing? How is encouraging responsibility the same as telling people not to speak? Because for some people, it is the same thing, Joy said. When you're already fighting to be taken seriously, already told you're not qualified, not credible, then hearing that message reinforced by someone with your platform does silence you. Whether you intend it or not, Kane's voice dropped. Quieter, but more dangerous. Then maybe the problem isn't what I'm saying. Maybe the problem is that we've created an environment where any call for thoughtfulness is treated as an attack. Maybe we're so afraid of being silenced that we've made standards impossible. Joy leaned forward. Standards set by whom, Kevin? Historically, the people who set the standards are the ones who benefit from them. So forgive me if I'm skeptical when someone who's thrived inside the system suddenly wants to talk about standards. I'm not talking about gatekeeping, Bacon said. I'm talking about truth. About facts. About not spreading misinformation or conspiracy theories just because they feel righteous. Those aren't arbitrary standards. Joy, they're the minimum requirements for honest discourse. And who decides what's true? Joy challenged. Who decides what's fact and what's misinformation? Because those judgments aren't neutral and they never have been. Kevin. Those judgments are made by people, Joy said firmly. People with their own biases and perspectives. Bacon stood again this time, when he spoke. The room fell completely silent. "You want to know what I really think, Joy?" he said, his voice low but heavy. "I think you're so invested in a framework of oppressor and oppressed of, privileged and marginalized, that you've stopped seeing individuals. You look at me and you don't see a person. You see a category, a symbol. Someone who fits neatly into a box you've already decided needs to be challenged, corrected, or taken down." He gestured to himself. "But you don't see me. You don't see my beliefs, my values, or the life I've actually lived." The audience didn't move. Joy's animated expression hardened into stone. "That's a very convenient speech," she replied coolly. "Compelling, even. But it doesn't change the fact that you said what you said, and people heard what they heard. No amount of talk about nuance or connection erases the impact of your original statement." "Then we're at an impasse," Bacon said simply, "because I can't control how people choose to interpret my words, especially when those interpretations are filtered through assumptions made long before I opened my mouth. I can only control what I say and what I mean. And I've been as clear as I can be." Joy stood to face him across the coffee table. "You're right," she said. "We are at an impasse. Because I refuse to pretend that words don't have power. That context doesn't matter. That privilege is some abstract idea people bring up just to make you uncomfortable." Bacon studied her for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. "You're not the villain here, Joy, and neither am I. We're just two people so certain of our positions that we can't hear each other anymore. That's the real tragedy." "I can imagine other perspectives," Joy said quietly. "I just don't agree with yours, and I'm not going to pretend I do for the sake of false balance." "I'm not asking you to agree with me," Bacon replied. "I'm asking you to consider that you might have misunderstood me, that your interpretation might not be the only valid one." Joy shook her head. "I heard what I heard. And so did everyone else who's been talking about this for months." Bacon reached for his jacket, lifting it from the back of the couch. The gesture was calm but final. "Or maybe," he said, "we're living in a culture more interested in outrage than understanding. More interested in tearing people down than trying to hear them." "That's a dramatic exit line," Joy said sharply. "It's not an exit line," Bacon replied. "It's an observation, and it's exactly what I was talking about in that interview. We've created an environment where nuance dies, where complexity gets flattened, where every statement is mined for offense. It's a perfect loop of dysfunction." One of the other hosts made a last attempt to salvage the moment.